Hello and welcome to the EchoChamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves and today we're going secularism, Martin. Do you know what that means?
I do know what secularism, that's church versus state.
Right. As always, I'm delighted to be joined by my co-host and the man who thinks the only religion is himself and has a little shrine in that little cubby hole at the back of the kitchen in Ashbourne. Martin, those relics that you have, your old toenails and all.
Oh, Scarlet for your laugh, haven't you?
But much more importantly, I'm delighted to be joined at the Tortoise Shack by lawyer and campaigner for separation of church and state, equality education?
Education equality, yeah, education equality.
Paddy Monahan. Paddy, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. And I mean, honestly, sincerely, it's something that myself and Martin have quite often said on the podcast and people sometimes quite find funny. We're kind of, I'd be more the militant atheist. You'd be fairly atheist.
Well, religion's just too much trouble, you know. So I'm sort of the lazy atheist.
But we have got a thing. There is a problem in this country with the a la carte Catholicism that we have. And when you have a la carte Catholicism, it's take the bits you like and just use them. But what we're really going to talk about, and I think it's important that I foreground this at the beginning. It's only a few days ago that where we had a story come out in the media which would have got a bigger coverage if it hadn't been for the scandal of the cervical cancer checks and screening. But we had people come out and say that the new National Maternity Hospital will have to adopt the ethos of the founding members of the Sisters of Charity. This is after almost a year of outrage and protests, and where the government said we have a golden share and we will be the people there will be no interference, there will be full medical, the doctors will not have any interference from any church, and this is the way it's going to be. Then you have a statement like that. We keep thinking we're a progressive society and we keep getting pulled back and pulled back. None more so than in our school system. Paddy, I know you have strong feelings on this, so I'm going to give you the...
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for having me over. I'm really looking forward to a nice chat about everything you've mentioned, and a nice broad chat. First of all, I should say I'm with an organisation called Education Equality, working with some brilliant people in there. And clearly we're going to be touching on a lot of issues today that aren't necessarily focused just on education. You mentioned secularism, separation of church and state, and these are things I have strong opinions on and have plenty to say about. But first of all, I would say education equality. We stand for two things and two things only. That is equal access to our schools, so no discrimination on the basis of religion in access to our taxpayer-funded schools. And secondly, equal respect in school. And what that means is we stop segregating children in the classroom on the basis of their religion. So children don't have to sit at the back of the class while religion or faith formation is being taught. Instead, faith formation should be taught outside of school hours. So they're the two things that education equality stand for. And other than that, anything else you hear from Paddy Monahan today will be my own opinion and my own tuppence worth, because on those two issues, I'm very much representing education equality and separation of church and state. To be honest with you, I know full well that for a lot of people, this is a fundamental issue in the separation of church and state, because we're talking about 4 and 5 year old children. Education equality does not in itself advocate for the separation of church and state. There are other organisations to do that. But clearly, there's plenty of people who understand that this is one of the fundamental issues in the separation of church and state when you're dealing with the hearts and minds of 4 and 5 year old children in what is a fundamental taxpayer-funded service.
In practical terms, Paddy, tell us what it's like in practical terms. If you've got to go and bring your child to register for a school or to put their name down for a school, child hasn't been baptised or is a different faith, what do you face?
Yeah, well, this is an interesting thing and goes back to secularism, separating church and state, and atheism, which you mentioned earlier. Loads of members of education equality, lots of people who've been on the committee with me of education equality are people of faith. So you don't have to be atheist. You don't have to be... Really what you believe is that access to a taxpayer-funded service should not be dependent upon your religion. So what you face, look, the reason I got involved in this was back in 2015. My kid was born March 2015. And it was around about then, maybe a month or two beforehand, I started looking at schools and school enrolment policies. And that was when the penny dropped that 98% of schools in this country are denominational by nature. That in itself isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is what they do with that. By law, under the Equal Status Act 2000, they are allowed to give preference to children in admissions on the basis of their religions. That's 98% of our primary schools can give preferential access to children on the basis of religion. And that's when I started freaking out. That's when I said there's something really weird here.
And I'm right in saying that 97% of the children are baptised, and less than a third actually attend Mass. Like, you know,
I know it's a tiny proportion who attend, and I know the number who are baptised, but this again kind of comes back to when it comes to atheist, personally, I'm an atheist, but lots of people very, very close to me, my family and friends are not, and in education equality are not. When it comes to religion, I'm very, very much laissez-faire. I say, everyone do what you want. My main point is I don't want the state forcing people, giving people preferential treatment on the basis of that religion. And so people may have their reasons. I know that, for example, recent marriage statistics, I think marriage is an interesting one to measure people's commitment, the fact is, marriages, I actually have the full stats here. Marriage statistics have been changing massively over the past sort of 20 years. And it's 1990. No, we take 1995 because that's only about 20 odd years ago. Over 90% of marriages were Catholic marriages. 5% were non-religious. That's 1995. 90% to 5%. 2017 statistics, 50.9 are now Catholic. 36.9 are non-religious. And what I'll say about that is, what that reflects is, they are the choices people make when the state does not give any advantages, it makes no difference whether you have a religious wedding or a Catholic wedding. These are the choices that people make. And yet, as you say, the rate of baptism is far, far higher than that, because there are pretty huge advantages to be gained from having your child baptized.
It's interesting, because I know I didn't have a Catholic wedding. That was, we didn't. We had a registry office wedding, we had a location wedding, that was the route we chose to take. And yet, my children are in the system and that's how I put it. They're in the system because, you know, there's a good school. There's you know, what parish are you in is one of the initial questions, albeit on Squelga. You know, you have to put up with this kind of conveyor belt of this is the system and this is what you're going through, and the schools 9 times out of 10 they're not just of a Catholic ethos, they're named after Saint whatever it is, and you know, and we're going, and that's the conveyor belt.
I see, particularly where I live, there's a very high concentration of non-national Eastern Europeans where I live. Great people, great in the community, but they have a mix of faiths. And about 18 months ago, one of the people I know, Lenka, was trying to get her son, she was on RTE, she's trying to get her son into one of the schools out there. And Lenka had babysat for us for years. And I didn't know Lenka was Protestant. It never even came up. You know, these things don't come up. And they couldn't get him into the school of their choice. They tried the next school, couldn't get him in there. And eventually, and late starting, in an Educate Together school. So there is huge barriers. Even if you're not feeling them, they exist in your community. There are massive barriers to people. And these kids are playing together on the street. These kids are friends. The only thing that's separating them in school is a religion. And we're trying to get away from that up north, and yet we're fairly enshrining it here in our education system.
I know, I have another friend who I met through this, Rupesh Panikkar, and his situation is very similar, but it's worth mentioning because Rupesh was very active on this. He's been on TV a couple of times. His little daughter, but it's the quote from his daughter that brings a lump to my throat every time. You know, ministers have come and gone, and hopefully we'll come around to talk about the ministers and what they've proposed, because it's important that we acknowledge Richard Bruton has some pretty serious proposals in this area that should be coming into draft legislation pretty soon. But Rupesh's daughter said, what people typically say is, but we want to give choice. Rupesh is a Hindu, it so happens, and so is his wife. We want to give choice. We want to give access to, you know, choice of schools. First of all, there's not a Hindu school in the country. Second of all, I don't agree with the notion that it's somehow a good idea to have segregated schools, a Muslim school here, a Hindu school here, and so on. But listen, the answer was, what I think Rupesh's daughter, aged 4, summed it up perfectly. And this is a quote from her. She said, she didn't say, Daddy, I want to go to a Hindu school. Daddy, I want a choice. She said, Daddy, why can't I go to school with the kids I went to creche with?
Yeah.
Why can't I go to school with the kids I went to creche with? She ended up going to a school. Some people will say, so what? She ended up going half an hour away from where she lives, while all the other kids went to the school around the corner because they're baptised Catholics. Now, people say, so what? Didn't you get into a school? It's not about getting into a school. It's about equal access. And this is a key point. Neither Rupesh nor I nor anyone else is saying that I want preferential access. What I'm saying is, I want a fair crack at the whip. Put all the names into a draw drum. There's a fair way of doing it. Pull out the names, and if my name isn't pulled out, then fair enough. But no more than it should be based on a child's skin colour. It should not be based on a child's religion.
I always go back to it because it's my background. But when you deal with people in any financial industry. You can't discriminate. You can't discriminate in a workplace on the 7 heads of discrimination. And I always find it very funny that among them is race, religion, sex, orientation, and there's also a place of birth is always one that I get a great laugh out of, because we're terrible in Ireland for discriminating about place of birth. Yet you can't do it in reality. You're not supposed to do it in a workplace. So by dint of birth, the child is born into a Hindu family and is told that the playing field is against you. That is fundamentally unfair. So if we want to talk about living in a republic of opportunity, when we have, to our credit, and I mean this in the broadest sense, because I don't want to take credit for it, but when you have a Taoiseach who is from a migrant background, who is literally first generation from his family, and you say that this is the scenario where he can aspire to be Taoiseach, we should be able to say, well, everybody should have that. And he talks about an equality of a republic of opportunity. And outside of the republic of opportunity, when you take that further, it's about equality of opportunity. Now, equality of opportunity actually is a myth in terms of it's never actually worked that way. But we have to understand that we have to have the framework for it. A child's education should be one of the very first steps.
Well, a language in this is important. And you're talking about religious ethos schools or religious-based schools. But in fact, what you're talking about is segregated schools. It's a segregated school system. Segregation isn't necessarily, it's not down to the colour of your skin. It can be down to your religion. And we see this all over the world. Regardless of religion, you can be kept out of things. If you're not giving people the same access to the same group of peers growing through, you're not giving them an equal education. You're giving them a separate education that runs in tandem with the mainstream education. We have to change the language on this and stop calling it, religious-based schools, and start saying, look, they're actually segregated schools. You're segregating out other children. So change the language, and then maybe we can get ministers to move on it. You've said that there's some moves coming down the line. What kind of moves are coming?
Well, the legislation in question, this is all to do with access to schools, and it's really important that we talk about respect in schools as well. That's where kids get shunted to the back of the class for half an hour every day while religion is taught, but hopefully we can come to that. Just strictly on the issue of access to schools, we're dealing with the Equal Status Act. We're dealing with Section 73C of the Equal Status Act. And it's interesting you should mention language, and it's interesting that you should mention the manner in which the 9 grounds of discrimination apply, because the Equal Status Act, front and centre, says these are the 9 grounds of discrimination, thou shalt not discriminate. But then, in the most pernicious, abusive language I can think of, they say, but it shall not be discrimination for a school with a religious ethos to prioritise kids.
And as if that overrules the actual the law.
And an outsider would look at that, and first of all, it shouldn't apply to any school, but secondly, an outsider would look at it and say, well, a school with a religious ethos, that's a couple of schools, I suppose. No, 98% of schools. 98% of schools. What it's actually saying is the entire school system is entitled to do this. So that's the situation we're in. So coming to, this is a big step, Minister Bruton. I had a petition back in 2015 that gained a lot of signatures, brought some attention to this issue with a lot of help from people who are now in education equality, and also people like Nicky Murphy, a woman on Dublin 6, whose child was turned away from 8 schools on the basis of his religion or lack thereof. 8 schools in the area turned him away. Schools do this when they're oversubscribed. So what Minister Bruton did was, in early 2017, he said that he had a consultation process, and he gave a few different options to people for how we might deal with this. One of the options he came up with was the way schools, and I encourage your listeners, look at your local schools' enrolment policy if you have doubts about this, because trust me, it'll be in the enrolment policy. Typically, your local school will say local Catholics first. Then it will say Catholics from anywhere else second. Often it will say other religions next, or Protestant ethos next. Actually, Protestant schools are interesting because they tend to have really, really stratified enrolment policies with kids of no religion about number 9 or 10 on the list. But anyway, one of the options Minister Bruton came up with was we could have a system whereby, yes, local Catholics are still prioritised, but then other children from the area will be taken. So those Catholics from everywhere else will not come second anymore. Now, the problem with that is when a school is oversubscribed, it typically tends to be from the local area anyway.
It'll be full anyway.
It's playing with language. Minister Bruton, after this consultation process, didn't choose that option. But the reason I mention it is because that is the option that Fianna Fáil are still putting forward. And last I heard, it was the option that the Labour Party, this was well over a year ago, that the Labour Party had suggested. Now, education equality, we've got meetings with the various parties and minister and education spokespeople, so we're very much hoping that it's not the case that Labour still have that view, and we hope that Fianna Fáil can change their view when they learn that the idea of, first of all, it still allows prioritised access, it's still discrimination on the basis of religion, and still, practically speaking, it's not going to help anyone, because when a school is oversubscribed, it will be from the local area. What Minister Bruton has ended up mooting was last summer, 2017, he said what he would do is he would say that Catholic schools, the legislation he will produce will mean that Catholic schools can no longer prioritise on the basis of religion, but other minority faith schools will be able to prioritise. So 90% of primary schools are Catholic schools. So leaving remaining whatever it is, 7% or thereabouts of minority schools they can still prioritise.
To discriminate with themselves.
To discriminate. Yeah. So there's this obviously raises a lot of problems. First of all, the legislation hasn't been drafted yet. Secondly, it still allows discrimination by taxpayer-funded schools. And thirdly, we still have to debate all this. But in education equality, we're entirely voluntary, and we have a lot of parents like myself. The reason I got started off in this issue was because I had this kid, and our local school is frequently oversubscribed, and it means that I don't think it's fair that he should be shunted from pillar to post trying to find a school. So we had frankly a big debate within education equality. What do we make of this proposal? We haven't seen the legislation drafted yet, so we don't know exactly the devil's in the detail. But ultimately what we said was we have to support this. If it means that 90% of schools will be removing this discriminatory factor, it means on a practical level, the vast majority of parents will benefit from this. So there will be organisations, I'm sure, that will say, no, we will not budge, and we insist on all or nothing. I can totally see why they would say that, and I agree.
There's an argument always, and it is that kind of argument of that, yes, we'd love to rip the Band-Aid off immediately, but sometimes incremental is where it's going to go. If you could start with such, that would be a big win. Okay, it would be a big win. It's not all the way there. It's actually probably creating problems further down the road, which you can foresee right now just talking to you. But at the same time, it's a start in the right direction. So I mean,
But the intransigence of government on this is, to a large part, informed by very vocal, very strong, very well-funded religious groups. I know this because I had a conversation with one of their spokespeople about this issue on Twitter, and I said, as long as you're from the area, that must be the first priority, and the second priority must be, do you have a sibling in the school? And to me, they would be the two fundamental choosing factors for kids going into school. And he goes, no, the parents must have a choice on religious ethos. And I said, why?
Yeah.
Explain why. Because the parents are funding the school. And I said, well, it's taxpayers funding that. And then I was very quickly cut off and told, blocked.
Yeah.
And that was our old friend David.
Yeah. But David has a point. He has a point if that's what they want to do, and go stand on the side of the hilltop, right? If that's what they want to do. But at the same time, I'm sorry, the statistics bear it out. You just talked about how marriage has fallen off a cliff, church attendance has fallen off a cliff. You talked about the other end of that sentence of laissez-faire is laissez-faire the nature will find its course. Yeah. And the truth of that is, most of us weren't born and said, you know what, I think I want to be a Catholic. This was just how we were indoctrinated, and now most of us have either lost our faith, or we've just broadened our minds, as I prefer to look at it. But at the same, so why should I be funding, as you said, children to be given the option, and other children to be discriminated against? So am I paying into an overall taxpayer pot to pay for discrimination?
First of all, there's plenty of people who don't have kids who pay taxes as well. And,
yes, absolutely.
And so, I mean, you don't need to be a parent, which your friend David seems to suggest. But also, crucially, I can't say this enough, I could not possibly make a correlation between somebody's personal religious faith and believing that it's a good idea to segregate schools and segregate children within schools on the basis of religion. Because time after time after time, every person of faith I met agrees entirely, 100%. They say, yeah, this makes no sense. It doesn't make sense. So I would never draw a correlation between a person's personal faith and a belief that somehow segregation on the basis of that faith is a good idea.
When we look to the best countries for education in the world, and the best countries are the Nordic countries for education, and I think Finland is the best it has the best education system. And they had two things that they did. First of all, they have no religious ethos schools at all. And the second thing is no private schools.
Yeah, they've only one. They've no double tier.
There's no two tier, and everybody has equal access. The kids are happier. They get better results. Yeah. They start school later. They have no homework. I mean, the system is sitting there. You know, we are a country, and we are told in comparative norms to other countries we are this, that, and the other. We see best practice, and we completely ignore best practice, and we see it, and we know what best practice is. This is the best outcomes for children. This is the way you do it. And we say, oh, no, can't have that.
Yeah. And this person who you mentioned earlier, I have no idea who it is, so that's fine. We'll keep it that way. But it sounds like somebody with an ideological view on behalf of an organisation. And that's all I've come across in the 3+ years that I've been advocating on this issue. All I've come across on the side that wishes to keep segregation and keep the ability for schools to discriminate in enrollment on the basis of religion is institutional opposition from churches, from patron bodies, from representatives of various organisations. But honestly, apart from the odd time on a panel or in the audience, you might come across a parent who somehow thinks this is a good idea, but I mean it's virtually impossible to find a parent who actually thinks it's a good idea to have prioritised access on the basis of religion, because basically I want my kid to go to the local school, the school around the corner, with the neighbours, with the friends, with the kids from the GAA club. Like Rupesh's kid, I mean, God, a 4-year-old summed it up when she said, Daddy, can I not just go to school with the kids from creche? Yeah. You know, it's a no-brainer, but for some reason, well, look, maybe you might be better than me to read into why we had this huge difficulty politically getting this over the line.
Oh, well, I mean, that's very obvious. We have, I mean, when you can have a bishop on the front of the Irish Times waxing lyrical about what should happen in this country, that is the problem. There is too much.
We do. Like, I mean, it is only 2 weeks ago where a bishop said if we have a liberalisation of abortion, that it was basically that we'd have what was the phrase he used? It was,
I don't know. I don't really listen to bishops when they talk to me, Tom. You see, that's the problem.
But that was the other issue. The issue was like, why? Hang on. Someone quickly pointed out the UK has that liberalisation since '64 or whatever it is, and you know, it turns out we're not all
euthanized.
Euthanized. Yeah, that's right. We were all going to be. It was going to be a gateway to euthanasia. And you're going, oh my God, like, I'm sorry, but that gets platformed and it gets given more.
But then you get very sane people who blow it out of the water.
Martin, they own the land, they own the sites, they own the property, they own, so systemically, they're selling off parcels all the time to kings. But, you know, where's the state kicking back saying, where's the money back for the Magdalens? Where's the recompense and the money you were supposed to? Where is it? It just doesn't happen.
But this is the divestment of services, and this is what this country does really well, is divest services that should be under a state umbrella and divest them out to charitable organisations, including
But that's a Victorian mindset, because that was always a Victorian thing to do.
It's also libertarian.
In the modern era, that's because it's become, instead of outsourcing it to the church, you now outsource it to America, and you find out that poor Vicky Phelan didn't get her scan checked correctly. Sorry, I'm just getting a bit annoyed here.
But we have grown up an awful lot in 20 years. So why the impasse when it comes to education?
Well, it's interesting you should mention growing up the last 20 years, because this also, I mean, when our national school system started in, 1830s, thereabouts, there's a fellow called Stanley, surnamed Stanley, who was more or less in charge of seeing this through. And his idea was that we would have essentially a secular education system wherein there may well be teaching of faith formation, but that it would be a separate class outside of school hours for a kid. And that's what we're advocating in education equality. And then since then, For whatever historical reason, yes, religious patrons have essentially taken over the running, particularly of our primary education system. So the question is, why have we allowed this to happen? Honestly, I don't know. I'm extremely frustrated, and I feel sorry, particularly for people like, who I mentioned already, Rupesh and Nikki, and there's a hell of a lot more like them, but I have their permission to mention them, so I'll talk about them. I feel very sorry for them, because their kids are now in school. My kid is only 3, so I'm really hoping that we can get this law changed before then, because what we were told under the last government with Jan O'Sullivan and with Rory Quinn was the Attorney General tells us that it's unconstitutional. We can't do this. We can't make this change to school access laws because the Constitution says that we can't. And I mean, needless to say, they never published anything that the Attorney General said to that effect. We fought it. Education Equality produced a senior counsel opinion saying that discriminatory access is not allowed for in the Constitution. In fact, the Constitution says we need to change this. But nonetheless, and then suddenly Richard Bruton came along, and from Fine Gael, make of that what you will, having had 2 Labour ministers in a row, with a Fine Gael minister who has now, well, as I said, it's flawed. What he's put forward is flawed. And education equality, we're not waving a flag saying this is wonderful, but we've debated and said, well, practically speaking, it's a huge step for a lot of parents, and it's going to ease pressure on a lot of parents, so we have to get behind this. And that's why in the next couple of weeks we're knocking on doors in Leinster House between the Social Democrats, Labour, Fianna Fáil, Sinn Féin, and anyone else who listen to us, to try to get people behind, once assuming the legislation when published reflects what he said he would do last summer, to try to get people behind that, so we can get the 90% of schools open to all children. Because the Constitution, we always would have said, was it was behind us. Everything in the Constitution is behind us.
Imagine if it makes no sense that the Attorney General can turn around and say it always defies logic, because the Constitution is an evolving document. It's going to be amended hopefully on the 26th of May after this referendum on the 25th. So the Constitution is an evolving document. If it actually allows for discrimination, which is the argument that we're being told, if it allows for discrimination, well, I'm sorry, then it's the Constitution that needs to evolve, not the actual the legislation that we're looking to put in place. So hiding behind that chestnut on advice of the Attorney General, unpublished, as you said, is just an outrage. It's the same thing. It happened yesterday again. It was the first thing that they said when they started discussing as this drip, drip, drip. The first thing they said is, we're going to take advice on the Attorney General. The next thing then they automatically says, we think we need a statutory inquiry. Right? We have a system of kicking the can down the road and then trying to put down the road, drawing a veil over it so you don't get to see it. This is actually something that's going to affect more and more people. We're starting to have a younger population again, having lost a decade. It's coming again, and we do need to see.
Well, the birth rates are particularly in County Fingal. Yeah. The birth rates are true.
and you and your bike going door to door.
Yeah, but the birth rates are, and there's a school building program going on. Yep. So, it is an apt time to get this stuff sorted. And if you stand back from the picture a little, you just stand back and you say, well, okay, my life partner is pregnant. Okay, the church has a say and she's pregnant. She needs to deliver a baby. Okay, church has a say in the hospital she goes into. My children need to be educated. Okay, church has a say in what way your kids need to be educated. It's kind of a big trap that you're caught in from before birth. Yep. You are caught in this trap where you're not an autonomous, you as a parent, you're not autonomous. You can't decide what's best for your child. You have to have somebody in a white collar saying, well, no, we can't have that actually. Yeah. And these people aren't elected. And from the survey you just showed us there, 50% of us couldn't give a shit.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I said, I wouldn't infer anything from a person's religion or religious ceremonies about how they feel. I think most people would feel that it makes sense that state-funded services should never be on the basis of a person's religion in any case, and that includes people who are religious. And as you say, there's a lot of new schools that will be opened. I think the Minister was talking about 400. I mentioned earlier before we went on air that I worked for some NGOs, one of which was Educate Together back in the day. Mm. So Educate Together is a patron body. Education Equality, who I volunteer for, we're just a bunch of parents and volunteers who are trying to get a couple of changes in the law. So I would imagine of those 400 schools, quite a few, if presumably all goes to plan, I think 2030 is when he intends on having them open by. a lot of those will be Educate Together. Now, I wouldn't have worked for Educate Together if I didn't think they were brilliant. Brilliant schools, great ethos. I'd love my kid to go to one. So it's oversubscribed and he's not going to get in there, but brilliant schools. But I think that most people in Educate Together would probably agree that they are not the answer. Educate Together is creating a separate, having a certain number of schools with an Educate Together ethos, and then another ethos here, another ethos there. That's not the answer in itself. It's great. I would love my kid to go to one of those schools. They're brilliant. But all ministers who I've come across on this issue repeatedly use the word choice. And obviously it's great to have these microphones here because it just used to kill me. Part of me shriveled up and died every time I heard the word choice, because choice sounds great. It's touchy-feely. Nobody wants to say, oh, no, we don't want choice when it comes to schools. But when you think about it, when you actually think about what does choice mean when you say schools, we're talking about religious choice, obviously. Mm. So what it actually means is a school for everyone in the audience. It means a Muslim school here, a Jewish school here, a Protestant school here, a Catholic school here. And what it means is we've got a hyper-segregated, balkanized education system. And we have kids essentially growing up from the year 4 to the year 18, only seeing people reflecting their own background. And I don't believe there is a democracy in the world who think that is actually, yes, this is how we should run our education system. Now, it may be a historical disaster that we ended up with this, but now is the time to start fighting that. So while choice of schools, yes, it's a good thing, it's most definitely not the answer.
A little while ago, Sean O'Rourke did a piece from the north of Ireland, and he was talking to parents on both sides of the divide. And they said that the greatest leap forward for them, and it wasn't for them personally, it was for their children, was that they were now in mixed education, largely in mixed education. And that the parents couldn't lose the past, but the children were unaware of it. And that was great. When you think these people are in a melting pot together and all views and all opinions are together, that's what you want your education system to be. When they say choice, it's the choice to segregate. Now, it's not choice to get your child educated. It's choice to have your child educated in segregation. Yeah. That's not a choice. That's an imposition.
We had a lady on recently who had journalists who had been in Syria and Iraq and had been using Turkey as a vehicle to go over the border. And part of the conversation we had downstairs was around Turkey and Ataturk and the likes. And you'd be surprised to know that Ataturk insisted that there was no place for religion in the school system in Turkey. You'd be surprised that the father of the nation and this predominantly Muslim country said that teachers were the only people who saved nations, not clerics. When you think of, if we want to be taken seriously at what we're trying to do, we're not enlightened really when it comes to that, because if you're saying choice, as you say, means actually having a school for children who are raised as Catholic, Church of England, Church of Ireland, Jewish faith, Islam. I mean, what are we doing? Are we just teaching them barriers? Because what you do there is it's like drawing the maps. Do you ever see the maps that they used to draw in Northern Ireland and show? They used to colour code them to let you know this section was green, this section was orange. That's what you're doing in effect. Is you're just inoculating them from a young age to know.
You're building walls. It's Trumpian stuff. Yeah. You're building walls between people.
Well, we're not going to use Trumpian anymore. Let's not credit him with anything ever again.
I think the hospital issue, okay, because we're in this maelstrom, and rightly so, over the smear test and the hospital issue it's still there, but it's burning underneath. And I think that will come to the fore. And I think it's time people started to link education and the healthcare system together and say, well, why do we have religion so involved in these two basic fundamental tenets of society? Why is religion so very much involved? Yeah. We're a grown-up nation. We've moved past this, or we should have moved past this. We have people who sit in the Dáil who are atheists, who are Catholics, Protestants. I mean, we can do non-segregation in the Dáil. Why can't we do it in our schools? I mean, it was just this week, there was a senator appointed from the north, and he's a Protestant senator appointed from the north. And nobody bats an eyelid. We see this as a really good thing.
I haven't slept since.
But we see it as a good thing. We see it as a really good thing. Now, if it's good for the Dáil, why isn't it good for our education system to have those views, to have those mixed views?
Yeah. Oh, listen, I mean, this is it. And you mentioned, I think, the Employment Equality Act, and again, the grounds for discrimination arise in that. But what people don't realise, I was in the Dáil the night that it was back in late 2015, December 2015, when the Employment Equality Act was amended so that a person could not be discriminated against on the basis of their sexual orientation anymore in employment. In a school in particular, because
yes, that was huge.
Under the Act, again, we have teachers could be affected by this. So that was changed, but they only went 50% of the way. They did it in terms of sexual orientation, but it still remains that a person can be discriminated, a teacher can be discriminated on the basis of their religion in employment in our taxpayer-funded schools. And of course, de facto, there's going to be a lot of crossover between a person's religious beliefs and practices and so on, and probably to some extent with their sexual orientation, because it's maybe this is a bit of a stretch, but I would have thought it's unlikely that a person is going to be hand in glove with the Catholic Church, having seen their attitude to basically homosexuals. So yeah, the Employment Equality Act is another area in which there is still discrimination. But as I said, we're a bunch of parents, we're a bunch of volunteers in education equality. We've had teachers come to us and say, "Why don't you work on this as well?" And we've limited means, so we focus on the two things I mentioned. There is a group called Teachers for Equality, so I think teachers should get in touch with them. But the two things, and I'm really grateful to you both for having me on here, because the two things, if I was going to do anything, number one, I would say anyone who's affected by this, contact us in Education Equality, just get us on Facebook, send us a message, and basically, we probably can't solve it because these are the laws that we have at the moment, but you'll find a sympathetic ear and somebody who understands the law and anything that can be done, and also we'll continue to advocate, and hopefully your voice can be used to help us to advocate for these changes. The second part is I have another petition going at the moment, so it's on Uplift, it's on the front page of Uplift, and that petition specifically is for equal respect in schools. That's something that we haven't spoken about so much, and that is whereby, your kid might get into the local school, maybe the local school is undersubscribed. It's estimated that about 1 in 5 schools, primary schools, are oversubscribed. So chances are there's a good chance your local school will not be oversubscribed. But almost certainly what will happen is for half an hour every single day, your child will sit at the back of the class on their own while faith formation goes on. That's the class is segregated, and any children who are not of the patron's religion will sit at the back of the class, and that's called opting out. What we say in education equality is that that's completely wrong. It stigmatizes children, and the obvious thing to do is just have the faith formation class at the end of the day. Have it outside school hours.
Everyone's Saturdays.
Everyone's a winner. Nobody's a loser. We're not affecting the patronage or ethos of the school, but we're just saying do it outside of school hours. And we've again met nothing but intransigence on this, and the minister hasn't shown any willingness to move on that yet. So basically, the next step is we want to get rid of the baptism barrier entirely from all schools. Although the 90% that he's hopefully will deal with will be a step in the right direction. But after that, speaking as a dad to a 3-year-old who's going to be going to school in a year or two, I'm absolutely not going to take it that my kid is going to sit at the back of the class every day for half an hour. That is, he is not going to be stigmatized. He's not going to sit in his own separately, doodling, doing mindless busy work. What we need to do is move, and this isn't for the sake of my child, this is for the sake of equality and for equal respect for everyone. Move the teaching of faith formation to the end of the school day. And actually, just let me quote, this is our Constitution says this. The Constitution, Article 44.2.4, explicitly sets out, and I quote, the right of any child to attend a school receiving public money without attending religious instruction at that school. The right is there in the Constitution. You have a right to attend a school, any school receiving public money, without attending religious instruction, shunting them to the back of the class to sit there. And this is going to be for the next, 14 years of their lives, absorbing every word of the lesson, seeing all the other kids singing songs together while they're sitting on their own at the back of the class. That is deeply, deeply wrong. And so, yeah, that's part 2 of what we advocate for in education.
Well, if you think that a baptismal cert is now your pass into primary education, yet a baptismal cert is entirely between you and the church. Yeah. Entirely. It's completely, utterly, privately your own business. So how it has become some card you must present,
a passport,
to get education in this state, that is very ridiculous. Yeah. And it is ridiculous. And as a kid my parents took me out of religious education in secondary school. So I did all that, sitting at the back of the class, sitting outside the class. I've done all that. And, it's not productive time. It's certainly not productive.
Well, schools actually insist that it can't be productive. Schools, this is terrible. Schools say that this will be advantageous to the child in question. So they can't do homework, they can't get ahead, they can't do anything curricular. It's mindless, busy work. I don't blame teachers. Surveys have shown teachers are deeply against this, but nonetheless, it's what happens. And, I do blame schools, frankly. I do blame the schools because there's nothing forcing schools to do this. The law doesn't say you must segregate. The law doesn't even say you must have discriminatory enrolment. They choose to do it. The law allows them to do it, and so they do it. So that's why it has to come from the top down. The minister has to take a lead and say, you may no longer teach faith formation in school hours. You must do it after school.
Yeah, it seems a simple step, and that half hour extra could be spent on something, more productive.
There's great communities out there shooting up in Ireland where we've now got nearly, I think it's between 18 and 20% of our population now are originally from another country.
Yeah.
Okay. And they have, so on weekends, they have Polish school, they have these things where they go and they learn about the children learn about that side of their culture, that side of their family, that side of, these things are wonderful. They actually enrich our country. These people come in here, they broaden us as a country, they broaden our minds, they broaden our culture, and they actually, they're Irish citizens, that's as far as I'm concerned. But they can do it like that. But because we have this systemically built into us, it just needs to be rooted out, and it sounds like I'm being sinister about it, but at some point you have to actually pull it up from the roots. And there's an opportunity now, because we're planning all of these schools. We have we're front facing. We're heading into this new post UK new relationship and others, so we can shake off the shackles of our post colonialism. And let's go and let's try that. Let's just try, because God knows we owe the church nothing.
We don't. Not anymore. No, nobody in this country owes the churches a dime for anything. We don't owe them any deference. We don't have to have any respect for them. They are no different to any other organisation in this country.
Well, you can respect them, Martin. You just don't have to.
But you don't have to respect.
No, but my point is, look, people talk to people. You want to see, you treat people, you chat them, that's all the rest of it. But you certainly don't have to have a foothold in, as you said, education, health, or any of the other instruments of the state.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have I've said this before, I'll say it again, I think we have a national blind spot when it comes to religious discrimination in this country, because I think if we did this on the basis of, frankly, any other one of the grounds.
If you changed it and said, on skin colour.
Needless to say, there would be. But people don't really see this, because they don't see the problem, as I said, with kids sitting at the back of the class, with segregation on the basis of religion in the classroom. It's, generally speaking, the response that I've had is, well, what harm, sure, isn't it nice? And sure, it's the tradition, and it's seen as kind of a benevolent thing, but it's just to the people who are experiencing it, it's an inequality. And again, if it was on one of the other 9 grounds, as you say, skin colour would be a prime example, we wouldn't allow this to happen. I just have a quote here. United States Supreme Court, 1963. The court stated that the segregation of students during religious instruction carried with it the imputation of punishment for bad conduct. And when it came to opting out of classes, Supreme Court said, parents and children may well avoid claiming that right and simply continue to participate in exercises distasteful to them because of an understandable reluctance to be stigmatised. That's over 50 years ago.
Well, I can think that rings very true. I mean, and I know it, because I know a lot of what I would call opportunist Catholics who got their kids baptised to get them into school. It was much easier just baptise the kids and say, look, let's just go with the flow here, than to fight. I mean, you've taken a principled stand, you're fighting your corner. But for an awful lot of people, it's like, they don't really want to do it, but Jesus, what way are we going to get the kids into school?
Yeah. And then, but there are people, Peter McVerry, I heard saying a couple of years ago, that basically, if I remember correctly, he said that, he went further, he just said basically, the church should have nothing to do with schools and running of schools, and this should be everything to do with religion should be outside of schools.
But it's a cop-out for the state. I mean, it is a cop-out for the state that they save money. That's the cop-out. And everything in this country, and even what we're seeing right now, is let's cop out and save money on it. It costs people. It costs kids in their education. It costs women in their lives. It's about time we said, here, enough of this crap.
But there's really practical things, like you mentioned, the half-hour a day that could be used otherwise. But this is, we've just gone through communion time. I mean, the half hour ramps up more and more and more as the weeks approach.
Communion time, they do an entire program.
Yeah.
An entire program. Do this in memory.
But the amount of class time that's lost to that. And so it's not just the loss of class time, it's also, half an hour becomes so much more. And kids, it's such a celebration for some kids, but it's just totally stigmatizing other kids. And our state taxpayer-funded education system, it's just completely inappropriate for something, as you say, could easily be done on Saturdays. Preparation could easily be done on Saturdays. Everyone's a winner. No one's a loser. Everyone still gets their religious education, but just not at the expense of other people's rights. I used to hear the arguments against this. I mean, it was always, as I said, from institutional supporters. I never heard a parent saying it. But freedom of religion, it's our freedom of religion. We have a right to this, right to somehow have a school. As I said, like as if everyone in the country has a right to have a school precisely mirroring their own religious views. I mean, first of all, that would cost the state a fortune. It's practically impossible. But secondly, freedom of religion is about lack of state interference. It's about, if anyone was threatening people's freedom of religion, really, I'd be at the front of the line. If anyone was saying you can't practice your religion, I would be at the front of the march saying that is not what we have in a democracy. But freedom of religion means the state takes a step back and everyone is free. It's just it's equal respect for everyone as opposed to prioritising it.
It's a mindset, though. It's the exact same mindset when you talk about freedom of religion. It's freedom from my religion.
Well, it can't not have my religion.
But it's the same mindset when we talk about the difference between this republic of opportunity and the actual equality of opportunity. You can't. It's all well and good to say I believe in equality of opportunity because I'm a dentist in South County Dublin or whatever it is, and I believe in that and it's grand. But I don't want to do as long as little Billy can go to the private rugby school or whatever it is, and that's not a dig at those schools. They provide great services, but that's the reality. It's a stratified system, and if you're going to work down through the stratified, and you're going to try and work people into, you're actually discriminating on grounds of where they were born. You're discriminating on what opportunities are coming, whether it's a socio-economic class. That's built into the system. So let's cut the crap. Let's take the one thing we can do as a state. We can cut out the religious interference. We can't stop you being born to a dentist, but we can do something about the church being able to do it,
Yep. Well, I hope that this petition that you have going at the moment, I hope that garners some pace.
Yeah.
And we'll put up a couple of links.
Oh, we'll push it, yeah.
Great, much appreciated.
Yeah, no, we'll put up a couple of links. And, as far as Tony and I are concerned, I know Tony's on the same page as me. We just don't understand why schools are religified. We don't get it.
It drives me mad, and it is now, and I'm not talking out of turn. It's well known in my own local school where we go to things and people actually, the comment will be made to me, go, when you walk in here, do you not catch on fire? So I would be vocal enough in my opposition to that standard of teaching, but I'm still a hypocrite because I still have to put my children into the system and I still have to partake in these bloody beauty pageants. And, I have a big problem when you mention communion. I think it's a beauty pageant. But that, anyway, some people get a lot more out of it. I'm burying myself here with listeners because.
Well, it's worth remembering. Yes, some people do get a lot out of it, and that is their absolute right to get a lot out of it. But there are other kids in that classroom who get absolutely nothing out of it, and why should they be forced to partake?
But look, as I said, the institutions seem to have very strong views on this. But the funny thing is, I don't doubt that a significant proportion of the population of Ireland do have religious views. I know my own family and friends, there's plenty of people with religious views. But as I said, to a man and to a woman, I virtually never come across a person who thinks that religious segregation, be it inside the classroom or in terms of access to a school, who actually thinks that's a good idea. Now, what I would say is, I don't think human rights are a matter of opinion. I don't think opinion polls should matter, but it so happens that opinion polls support this entirely. And so plenty of Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, you name it, in this country, the vast majority are behind this.
And I think that's a great way to wrap this now, because when you've just said human rights, yes, it's nice to have the support of the general population in an opinion poll,
but it's not.
But it's not crucial.
Yeah.
Because if you can say this is the law, this is our basic human rights, these are what we're entitled to as you were born, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it's very appropriate, because we keep talking about this and people keep saying, coming up to the referendum that's coming, and the UN has said that our current constitution is cruel and inhumane and the equivalent of torture when it comes to our treatment of our wives, sisters, mothers. When you think of human rights, that's what we should be basing. That should be the bedrock. So I think it's great that you've made that point, and you've made it very well. And I have to say, I can see the frustration in you.
Totally, yeah. It's very personal.
No, it is very personal, and I can understand. I really can. And like myself and Martin are out the gap. He's got we've children in school, and we're moving along swimming down the channel, and it's moving along. But I can tell you, I can understand why you're so frustrated, but I can see how it's actually a bigger frustration for hundreds of parents when you're turning around and you're getting that passport to education is a baptismal cert.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing. It's a crazy thing, really and truly. I mean, it's so arbitrary. It's crazy.
Listen, guys, thanks so much for listening, and really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming in and chatting to us.
Really appreciate it.
I hope this can raise the profile slightly. And I've seen you before on other stuff, and this was discussed only a couple of weeks ago on Ray Darcy. I was listening to it on Ray Darcy. So, this is something. We're a grown-up nation. Let's just take that little step and say, look, it's discrimination. Let's cut it out.
Yep.
Cheers, folks. And again, as we say, leave us a review, tell your friends, make sure you spread the word. We have no budget. Paddy, I tell you, sitting in here now with barely a glass of water. Take care of yourselves, and we talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye bye.